When the first Messerschmitt Bf 109 took to the skies on May 29, 1935, flying from Honstetten Airfield near Augsburg, Germany, few observers in the Allied nations took it seriously. The aircraft was lean, compact, and unassuming, nothing like the robust, heavily armed fighters the British and French had grown accustomed to seeing. To many Western military observers, the 109 seemed like a rushed, undersized experiment, an inferior design that would never compete with the proven formidability of fighters being developed by established aviation powers. Some even dismissed it outright as a toy when compared to the Hawker Hurricane or the emerging Supermarine Spitfire. This casual dismissal would prove to be one of the most dangerous miscalculations of the Second World War. The story of the Bf 109's development begins not in the pristine laboratories of Berlin or Munich, but in the courtrooms and factories of a man fighting for survival in Nazi Germany's ruthless aviation industry. Willy Emil Messerschmitt, born in Frankfurt in 1919, had spent the 1920s designing advanced aircraft that impressed aviation enthusiasts but earned him enemies in high places. When Germany's new air ministry, the Reichsluftfahrtministerium (RLM), headed by Erhard Milch, officially announced a design competition in 1934 for a new fighter aircraft, Messerschmitt was initially excluded. Milch, who harbored a personal grudge against the designer, wanted him removed from German aviation altogether. But competing factions within the Luftwaffe saw potential in Messerschmitt's proven engineering talent. They ensured his company, Bayerische Flugzeugwerke (BFW), received a development contract despite Milch's opposition. In March 1934, Messerschmitt and his chief engineer, Robert Loescher, who had recently joined the company after stints at Klemm and Henkel, began work on project number P1054. The design brief was ambitious but not pre-precedented. The Luftwaffe specified requirements that seemed rational at the time: a maximum speed of 400 kilometers or 250 miles per hour at an altitude of 6,000 meters, the ability to reach that critical altitude in no more than 17 minutes, an operational ceiling of 10,000 meters, and sufficient armament to engage enemy bombers. What made the Messerschmitt design revolutionary was not the specifications themselves, but how Messerschmitt and Loescher achieved them. They opted for radical simplicity and advanced aerodynamic thinking. By May 1934, a basic mock-up was complete. By January 1935, a more refined design study emerged. The aircraft incorporated several innovative features that were either borrowed from Messerschmitt's earlier Bf 108 Typhoon or represented cutting-edge technology: a narrow-track landing gear that reduced drag, flush-riveted stress skin construction for superior aerodynamic efficiency, an inverted V12 engine installation that improved visibility and lowered the center of gravity, and crucially, Handley-Page leading-edge slats, automatic slots that would deploy at high angles of attack to prevent stalls during combat turns. The inverted engine mounting was particularly clever. It allowed a cannon to be mounted between the engine cylinders and fired through the propeller hub, concentrating all firepower in the nose without the need for external pods or wing-mounted weapons that created drag. On the morning of May 29, 1935, test pilot Hans Dietrich Notch strapped himself into the Bf 109 V1, Versuchsmuster 1, Prototype 1, and took off from Honstetten. The aircraft was powered by a Rolls-Royce Kestrel V12 engine, producing approximately 635 horsepower, not the intended Junkers Jumo 10A that was still under development. Despite this underpowered engine, the aircraft flew beautifully. The design showed immediate promise. The second prototype, the Bf 109 V2, first flew in October 1935, this time equipped with the Jumo 10A engine. The performance improvement was noticeable. But the real decision came in the summer of 1936 when the Luftwaffe's chief test pilot, Hermann Wurster, flew the aircraft through a series of demanding acrobatic maneuvers, Spins, rolls, precision turns, recoveries from extreme attitudes, all designed to stress test an aircraft's control authority and structure. Worcester completed the full test program successfully, often exceeding the aircraft's specified limits. When the Bf-109 was publicly demonstrated at the 1936 Berlin Olympics that August, observers from around the world watched this nimble fighter perform impossible-looking maneuvers. The Soviet attachés took notes. The Italian observers nodded with interest. The British and French officials, many of whom did attend, simply dismissed what they saw as a lightweight interceptor, inadequate for the coming challenges of modern air warfare. By autumn 1936, the Luftwaffe made its final decision. The Messerschmitt design had defeated the competing proposal from Henkel, the 112. Serial production preparations began immediately. The first production variant, the Bf-109B1, emerged in February 1937. Powered by the 695 horsepower Jumo 10DA engine and armed with three 7.92 mm machine guns, modest armament by any standard. Yet within months, this aircraft would be sent to prove itself in Spain, where it would astonish everyone who opposed it. The laughter from the West would soon turn to stunned silence. The dismissal of the Bf-109 in 1935-36 reflected a fundamental misunderstanding in Western military circles. While British and French designers believed in heavily armed, robust fighters built for sustained dogfighting, Messerschmitt had created something different: an efficient climbing machine, a fast striker, a pilot's aircraft that rewarded aggression and tactical awareness. The Allies had no idea what they were about to face.
The Messerschmitt Bf-109's true genius lay not in any single innovation, but in the integration of advanced design thinking with cutting-edge engine technology. While British and French designers pursued incremental improvements to existing proven designs, Messerschmitt and Lusser built the Bf-109 from first principles, designed to climb faster, turn at altitude, and accelerate away from danger. The aircraft's success depended entirely on one critical component, the Daimler-Benz DB601 engine, a liquid-cooled inverted V12 that would prove to be one of the most significant aero engines of the Second World War. Before the DB601 was available, the Bf-109's early prototypes flew with imported British engines. The Rolls-Royce Kestrel V12, which powered the first prototype in May 1935, was reliable and well understood, but delivered only 635 horsepower. When the Junkers Jumo 210A became available, producing approximately 680 horsepower at takeoff and 640 horsepower at 2.7 kilometers altitude, the second prototype showed marked improvement. But the Jumo was an interim solution. The Luftwaffe knew that sustained air superiority would demand superior engine performance. Enter the DB601. Developed by Daimler-Benz AG, the DB601 was revolutionary in several respects. First, it employed direct fuel injection, a technology that eliminated the carburetor float chamber principle used in most Allied fighters, including the British Rolls-Royce Merlin that powered the Spitfire and Hurricane. This injection system delivered fuel directly into the engine cylinders under pressure, providing a crucial tactical advantage in aerial combat. The Bf-109 pilot could perform negative G maneuvers, pushing the nose down sharply to dive away from an attacker, without the engine cutting out. A Spitfire or Hurricane pilot, dependent on carburetor float chambers, would experience fuel starvation during negative G pulls, losing engine power precisely when it was most needed for escape. This single feature would influence tactical doctrine throughout the Battle of Britain. The DB601 was also an inverted V12, the cylinders angled downward from the centerline rather than upward. This inversion provided four distinct advantages. It lowered the aircraft's center of gravity, improving stability and turn performance.
The Messerschmitt Bf-109's true genius lay not in any single innovation, but in the integration of advanced design thinking with cutting-edge engine technology. While British and French designers pursued incremental improvements to existing proven designs, Messerschmitt and Lusser built the Bf-109 from first principles, designed to climb faster, turn at altitude, and accelerate away from danger. The aircraft's success depended entirely on one critical component, the Daimler-Benz DB601 engine, a liquid-cooled, inverted V12 that would prove to be one of the most significant aero engines of the Second World War. Before the DB601 was available, the Bf-109's early prototypes flew with imported British engines, the Rolls-Royce Kestrel V12, which powered the first prototype in May 1935, was reliable and well understood, but delivered only 635 horsepower. When the Junkers Jumo 210A became available, producing approximately 680 horsepower at takeoff and 640 horsepower at 2.7 kilometers altitude, the second prototype showed marked improvement. But the Jumo was an interim solution. The Luftwaffe knew that sustained air superiority would demand superior engine performance. Enter the DB601. Developed by Daimler-Benz AG, the DB601 was revolutionary in several respects. First, it employed direct fuel injection, a technology that eliminated the carburetor float chamber principle used in most Allied fighters, including the British Rolls-Royce Merlin that powered the Spitfire and Hurricane. This injection system delivered fuel directly into the engine cylinders under pressure, providing a crucial tactical advantage in aerial combat. The Bf-109 pilot could perform negative G maneuvers, pushing the nose down sharply to dive away from an attacker without the engine cutting out. A Spitfire or Hurricane pilot, dependent on carburetor float chambers, would experience fuel starvation during negative G pulls, losing engine power precisely when it was most needed for escape. This single feature would influence tactical doctrine throughout the Battle of Britain. The DB601 was also an inverted V12. The cylinders angled downward from the central line rather than upward. This inversion provided four distinct advantages. It lowered the aircraft's center of gravity, improving stability and turn performance, improved forward visibility from the cockpit. The engine sat lower, reducing the nose-up attitude necessary for forward vision, simplified engine maintenance access beneath the aircraft's centerline, and, most ingeniously, it allowed the MG-151 20mm cannon to be mounted between the cylinder danks and fired through the propeller hub, concentrating all firepower in the nose. No wing-mounted weapons meant no external pods creating parasitic drag. The Bf-109's aerodynamic cleanliness was uncompromised. The DB601A variant, which equipped most Bf-109 E-Series fighters during the Battle of Britain, 1940 to 1941, delivered 1,175 horsepower at takeoff and maintained 1,090 horsepower at 5,500 meters, the altitude where most Battle of Britain combat occurred. This power output was achieved at 2,600 RPM through a single-stage, variable-speed centrifugal supercharger. The supercharger was barometrically controlled. It automatically adjusted boost pressure based on altitude, maintaining near-constant power output from sea level to the engine's critical altitude around 5,500 meters. Above that altitude, power declined, but the Bf-109's ability to hold high performance up to 6,000+ meters gave it a decisive advantage over the Spitfire and Hurricane in high-altitude engagements. The DB601's cooling system was liquid-cooled, pressurized, a vulnerability that Allied pilots would later exploit by concentrating fire on the engine block and cooling system. The engine breathed through a fuel system fed by Bosch direct fuel injection pumps, and its dry sump lubrication system allowed the inverted installation without oil pooling in the cylinders during negative G maneuvers. These technical details mattered enormously in combat. Yet, the DB601 was merely the foundation. The Bf-109's airframe was engineered with equal precision. The wing featured automatic Handley-Page leading-edge slots that opened passively at high angles of attack, preventing wing stalls during tight turning, crucial for close-in combat where an opponent might try to outmaneuver you. The fuselage was a monocoque stressed skin structure with flush riveting, minimizing surface discontinuities that created drag. The narrow-track landing gear, borrowed from the Bf-108, reduced drag considerably compared to the wider-stance British fighters. Control surfaces were actuated with trim tabs for precise authority at high speeds. The Bf-109 was in essence the embodiment of a single design philosophy: performance through efficiency. It rejected the concept of a heavily armored, robust gun platform in favor of a lean, climbing, fast-striking interceptor. Where the Hurricane was a sturdy workhorse, the Bf-109 was a thoroughbred. It was difficult to fly. The narrow gear, powerful engine torque, and sensitive controls demanded skilled pilots, but in the hands of an experienced aviator, it was nearly unbeatable during the early war years. By early 1937, the Bf-109B-1 entered service with the Luftwaffe's fighter squadrons. By late 1938, the improved E-Series with the DB-601 was under production. The stage was set for one of aviation history's most consequential contests.
While designers in Britain confidently refined the Spitfire on drawing boards, German pilots were learning to kill with the Bf-109 in the smoking skies over Spain. The Spanish Civil War, July 1936 to April 1939, served as the Luftwaffe's proving ground, a proving ground so valuable that historians now recognize it as the birthplace of modern fighter tactics and the crucible in which the Bf-109 was forged into a weapon of devastating efficiency. In July 1936, Generalissimo Francisco Franco, leading a nationalist rebellion against Spain's Republican government, requested military assistance from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Adolf Hitler, sensing an opportunity to test new aircraft designs, deploy pilots in combat conditions, and gain strategic advantage in the Western Mediterranean, authorized the formation of the Condor Legion, Legión Condor. This autonomous unit, officially commanded by General Hugo Sperle, eventually grew to approximately 12,000 personnel and included most of Germany's newest combat aircraft, the Heinkel He-111 bomber, the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber, and crucially, a cadre of Bf-109 fighters. The first Bf-109s arrived in Spain in late 1936. These were primarily B-series variants with the UMO 210 engine and 3 machine guns. Pilots immediately found them superior to the Soviet-supplied Polikarpov I-15 biplane and the newer I-16 monoplane flown by the Republican Air Force. But raw aircraft performance meant little without tactical doctrine. The Bf-109 was fast and climbed well, but Soviet pilots, flying in loose formations and employing aggressive maneuvers, initially proved dangerous opponents. Then came Hauptmann Werner Molders. Molders, a 25-year-old Luftwaffe pilot with exceptional tactical insight, arrived in Spain in March 1938 to take command of a Bf-109 squadron transitioning from obsolete Heinkel He-51 biplanes. Molders was brilliant, not in the romantic daredevil sense, but in the cold, calculating methodology of air combat. He observed that the RAF, and by extension most air forces, flew fighters in rigid formations, the Vic formation, 3 aircraft flying tightly bunched together, 10 feet 3 meters wingtip to wingtip. This tight grouping offered concentrated firepower but destroyed flexibility. Pilots had to watch their wingmen's positions rather than scanning the sky for threats. Molders concluded that this was suicide. Beginning in 1938, Molders and his pilots developed what would become known as the Finger 4 or Schwarm formation, 4 aircraft positioned as if the fingers of an outstretched hand. The leading pair, Rote, pair, stayed in relatively close formation for mutual support, but the second pair maintained looser spacing 10 to 15 meters away, providing separation and allowing pilots to observe wider sectors of sky. Within each pair, the lead pilot flew as the hunter, searching for targets. The wingman provided defense, watching the leader's tail for threats. This formation was revolutionary. It gave pilots field of view, mutual support, engagement flexibility, and leadership clarity. A pilot could see 180 degrees around while remaining protected, and attackers could be spotted early because 2 sets of eyes, positioned several meters apart, scanned different sky sectors. The Finger 4 allowed Bf-109 pilots to engage Soviet fighters with superior tactics, offsetting any numerical disadvantage.
Mulders scored 14 aerial victories in Spain, earning him recognition as the top German ace of the conflict. More importantly, he codified tactics that would define fighter aviation doctrine for decades, tactics still taught in modern air forces today. Beyond fighter versus fighter combat, the Condor Legion refined close air support (CAS) doctrine. Pilots like Wolfram von der Richthofen, not the famous Red Baron, but a distant relative and exceptional commander, developed chain attacks, multiple aircraft attacking the same ground target in sequence, with wingmen adjusting their aim based on the leader's hits. This maximized strike accuracy against a moving target. The shuttling system, where aircraft launched from forward airfields, attacked, returned, rearmed, and flew again multiple times per day, put unsustainable pressure on Republican forces. These lessons became foundational to blitzkrieg tactics. Operation Barbarossa's initial success owed much to lessons learned in Spain. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Bf 109 pilots deployed with verified combat experience, proven tactics, and psychological confidence that their aircraft and methods were superior to the opposition. Yet Spain also revealed the Bf 109's limitations. The narrow landing gear, while aerodynamically superior, was accident-prone. Pilots found ground handling difficult. Engine reliability issues emerged. Overheating, particularly in the Mediterranean climate, reduced serviceability rates. And against the newer Soviet Yakolev Yak-1 and Lavochkin La-5 fighters, neither of which appeared in Spain, the Bf 109's advantages would narrow considerably. By the time the Condor Legion returned to Germany in May 1939, more than 200 German pilots had gained combat experience. The Spanish Civil War had cost approximately 350,000 lives, created a fascist state, and given the Luftwaffe an incalculable advantage in pilot training and tactical development. The Bf 109, blooded in Spanish skies, emerged as the Luftwaffe's premier fighter, a reputation it would aggressively maintain throughout the Second World War.
When German bombers began crossing the English Channel on July 10, 1940, the pilots of RAF Fighter Command encountered an enemy aircraft that defied their expectations. The Bf 109E series, Emil, powered by the Daimler-Benz DB601 engine and armed with cannon and machine guns, was nothing like the outdated German fighters they expected. Within weeks, it became clear to British pilots and commanders that the Luftwaffe had deployed something dangerously sophisticated. The Battle of Britain would prove that Willy Messerschmitt's creation was not merely competitive, it was, in many respects, superior to both the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire in crucial performance parameters. The Bf 109E4, the primary variant deployed during the Battle of Britain, was equipped with the DB601A engine delivering 1,175 horsepower at takeoff and maintaining 1,090 horsepower at the critical altitude of 5,500 meters, precisely the altitude where most battles occurred. Compared to the Spitfire Mark I, powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin I producing 1,030 horsepower at takeoff, the Bf 109E offered a decisive edge in engine performance. Most significantly, the German aircraft could perform negative G maneuvers without engine power loss. When a Bf 109 pilot pushed the nose down in a dive, the direct fuel injection system provided uninterrupted fuel flow. A Spitfire pilot in the same situation would experience immediate engine hesitation or cutout as the carburetor float chamber gasped for fuel. German pilots quickly learned to exploit this. Threatened by a Spitfire, a Bf 109 pilot would roll inverted and dive sharply, knowing that his engine would continue to deliver full power while his pursuer's engine starved. The Bf 109 also possessed superior climb rate. At sea level, the E4 could climb at approximately 20 to 21 meters per second, enabling it to reach 5,000 meters in roughly 4 to 5 minutes. The Spitfire Mark I achieved approximately 16 to 17 meters per second at sea level. This performance advantage was compounded at altitude. Above 5,500 meters, where the Spitfire's Merlin I began to lose power rapidly,
The Bf-109's critical altitude kept it operating at higher efficiency. German pilots, therefore, frequently enjoyed altitude advantage at the beginning of combat, a fundamental factor in air combat doctrine. The attacker who starts above the defender controls the engagement. Yet the Bf-109E possessed a critical vulnerability: range. Designed originally as an interceptor to fight over German territory, the aircraft carried limited internal fuel, approximately 400 liters. This translated to a combat radius of only 330 kilometers without external tanks. When escorting German bombers to targets like London, located 280-plus kilometers from German airfields in France and Belgium, Bf-109 pilots arrived with minimal combat endurance. A pilot escorting bombers to London had approximately 10 minutes of combat time before fuel situation demanded return to base. Anything longer meant running out of fuel over the English Channel, a death sentence. The Bf-109E7, introduced in late 1940, addressed this deficiency by adding a 300-liter drop tank, doubling range to approximately 660 kilometers and extending combat endurance. But early war E4s were handicapped by this range limitation. The British Spitfire and Hurricane, by contrast, could remain over their home territory indefinitely, launching interceptions with radar guidance and climbing to meet German formations with superior numbers at various altitudes. The RAF's radar network, a strategic advantage the Luftwaffe never fully appreciated, meant British fighters could be positioned for optimal intercepts rather than flying random patrols. German pilots, conversely, launched from concrete runways in northern France, flew prearranged courses, and committed to their bombing mission or escort task with no flexibility to pursue advantageous tactical opportunities. Between July and October 1940, the Bf-109 claimed 529 aerial victories against RAF fighters and bombers, according to official German records. Likely inflated, as historical analysis suggests actual confirmed victories were lower. The RAF lost 208 Spitfires and Hurricanes shot down in combat during the same period. These statistics, while not telling the complete story of the battle, demonstrate the Bf-109's effectiveness. German pilots, battle-hardened from Spain and equipped with proven tactics, demonstrated proficiency that British pilots, many of them inexperienced, could not yet match. Losses on both sides were brutal. German bomber losses became unsustainable, and by late October 1940, Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was postponed indefinitely, then abandoned. The Luftwaffe, despite possessing superior fighter aircraft, could not achieve the air superiority necessary to support invasion. The Bf-109 emerged from the Battle of Britain with reputation enhanced but not decisive. It had proven itself an outstanding fighter in the hands of experienced pilots, capable of engaging and defeating British aircraft in favorable circumstances. Numerical advantage, tactical flexibility, and pilot replacement rates favored the RAF. By 1941, the British were producing Spitfires faster than Germany could manufacture Bf-109s, and surviving Spitfire pilots were gaining experience rapidly. The Bf-109's tactical window of superiority was closing. Within months, German focus would shift eastward to Operation Barbarossa, where the aircraft's advantages would initially prove devastating against a Soviet Air Force caught completely unprepared.
On June 22, 1941, at 03:15 hours, 637 German bombers and 231 fighters launched from bases across occupied Poland and Romania in preparation for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe was committed to delivering overwhelming air superiority in support of the Wehrmacht's advance across the Soviet frontier. What followed was not merely a military victory, it was an aerial devastation so complete that it fundamentally rewrote assumptions about air combat and pilot capability. The Bf-109 F-Series, Friedrich, which had entered service in 1941, was a major refinement over the E variant. Powered by the Daimler-Benz DB601E engine, producing 1,200 horsepower at takeoff and 1,280 horsepower at optimal combat altitude, 2,100 to 3,400 meters. The Friedrich offered improved climb, speed, and energy management compared to its predecessor. More critically, it featured improved aerodynamics, with refined fuselage lines and a completely redesigned engine cooling system that enhanced efficiency. Maximum speed increased from the E4's 575 km per hour to the F4's 635 km per hour at rated altitude. Climb rate improved proportionally. The Bf-109F was, in effect, a modernized interceptor perfectly suited to the fast-moving air battles characteristic of the Eastern Front. Soviet air forces, when Operation Barbarossa launched, numbered approximately 5,000 combat aircraft arrayed across multiple military districts. Yet the VVS, Vojenno-Vostochny Sily, Soviet Air Force, was fundamentally unprepared for modern air warfare. Aircraft were dispersed along the front in relatively small units, often on inadequately prepared airfields. Pilots were undertrained in comparison to their German counterparts. Most critically, command and control was paralyzed by the speed of the German invasion. Communication networks collapsed, and Soviet aircraft were committed piecemeal against concentrated German formations. On the first day alone, the Luftwaffe claimed 1,489 Soviet aircraft shot down in air combat, plus 336 additional aircraft destroyed on the ground. Over the following months, the disparity became catastrophic. German fighter units, operating with proven tactics, experienced pilots, and superior aircraft, inflicted losses on the Soviet Air Force that seemed almost unbelievable. By the end of June 1941, Luftwaffe fighters had claimed approximately 2,000 Soviet aircraft destroyed. These claims, while likely inflated, reflected a real and profound air superiority that allowed German armies to advance across the Soviet Union with minimal air opposition. The Bf-109's strength on the Eastern Front derived from several factors. First, its climb rate gave German pilots the ability to intercept Soviet bombers and fighters at altitude. Second, its fuel injection system and turn of speed allowed Bf-109 pilots to disengage from engagements that became unfavorable. Third, and most importantly, the aircraft was flown by pilots with extensive combat experience. Luftwaffe units rotated experienced pilots out of frontline service to become instructors, spreading combat expertise throughout the fighter force. Soviet forces, by contrast, burned through their trained pilots rapidly, replacing them with undertrained recruits who faced veterans with hundreds of flight hours in combat. The most devastating performance by Bf-109 units came during the initial phase of Barbarossa. Jagdgeschwader 52, Fighter Wing 52, equipped with Bf-109F and later G variants, accumulated approximately 10,000 aerial victories by war end, predominantly against Soviet aircraft. Three legendary pilots, Erich Hartmann, Gerhard Barkhorn, and Walter Nowotny, all flew with JG-52 and accumulated extraordinary kill counts that remain unmatched in aviation history. Hartmann, the all-time leading ace, claimed 352 aerial victories, with the vast majority achieved on the Eastern Front against Soviet fighters and bombers. Barkhorn, Hartmann's close competitor, claimed 301 victories, primarily against Soviet aircraft. Nowotny scored 258 kills, most of them on the Eastern Front. These statistics, while difficult to verify independently, German pilot claims were often inflated, reflect a profound reality. Bf-109 pilots, particularly those with extensive experience, were devastatingly effective against Soviet opposition. During the intensive operations of mid-1941 through 1942, German Bf-109 units claimed kill ratios approaching 7-to-1 or higher, meaning 7 Soviet aircraft claimed destroyed for every German fighter lost. On the Eastern Front specifically, pilot claims suggested ratios as high as 21-to-1, though historical analysis by modern scholars reduces this to more conservative figures around 3-to-1 to 5-to-1.
Nonetheless, even conservative estimates demonstrate overwhelming German air superiority. Yet, by 1943, the tide was turning. The Soviet aviation industry dispersed eastward and producing aircraft at vast scale, began fielding improved fighters. The Yakolev Yak-9 and Lavochkin La-5 were comparable to or superior to the aging Bf-109 in certain performance envelopes. Simultaneously, German pilot losses could not be replaced at the rate they were being incurred. By mid-1943, the Luftwaffe was forced to adopt defensive tactics, protecting increasingly vulnerable German territory from Soviet bombers, while the Bf-109 transitioned from an offensive interceptor to a home defense fighter.
As German air superiority on the Eastern Front gradually eroded, the Luftwaffe's response was characteristically straightforward: evolve the Bf-109. What had begun as a sleek interceptor in 1935 underwent continuous refinement, modification, and enhancement until, by 1945, the aircraft bore little resemblance to its origins. This evolution, from E series through F series, G series, and finally the K series, tells the story of an aircraft pushed to the technological and operational limits of its design, desperately attempting to maintain competitive parity against ever-improving opposition. The Bf-109 G6, which entered production in February 1943 and became the most mass-produced variant of all, more than 12,200 aircraft built through summer 1944, represented a dramatic redesign. Powered by the Daimler-Benz DB605A engine, the Gustav achieved 1,475 horsepower at takeoff and 1,310 horsepower at sea level in combat mode. At altitude, it maintained impressive power, 1,250 horsepower at 5,800 meters. Maximum speed jumped to 640 kilometers per hour at the optimized altitude of 6,300 meters. Yet these impressive numbers masked a fundamental problem. The G6 was significantly heavier than earlier variants, with a loaded weight of 3,148 kilograms, compared to the F4's approximately 2,900 kilograms. The additional weight, required to accommodate enhanced armament and structural reinforcement, degraded climb rate and handling characteristics. The aircraft became more of a workhorse than a thoroughbred. The G6's armament reflected the changing nature of air combat. By 1943, unescorted bomber formations were no longer vulnerable to fighter interception. American bombers, the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator, arrived in European skies in increasing numbers, defended by Lockheed P-51 Mustang long-range fighters that could accompany them all the way to targets in Germany. To combat these heavily armed bombers, German fighter designers enhanced the G6 with two 13mm MG-131 machine guns mounted above the engine, replacing the earlier fuselage-mounted 7.92mm MGs, and the nose-mounted 20mm MG-151 cannon. Newer G6 variants received underwing gondolas carrying additional 20 or 30mm cannon, transforming the fighter into a Jaeger, or pure fighter, or Zestorer, bomber killer configuration, depending on mission requirements. Against B-17 formations, firepower mattered more than maneuverability. Climb rate mattered less than ammunition capacity and sustained turn performance at medium altitude. The Bf-109 G10, introduced in mid-1944, attempted to extract maximum performance from the aging design, with the DB605D engine producing 1,800 horsepower in emergency power achieved through MW50 methanol water injection into the supercharger. The G10 could reach 690 kilometers per hour at 7,600 meters, the fastest of all G-series variants.
Yet these marginal speed advantages came at the cost of reduced range and massive pilot workload. Managing the MW50 injection system, monitoring engine temperatures, controlling manifold pressure, and executing combat maneuvers simultaneously strained pilot attention. Eric Hartmann, the war's top-scoring ace, famously stated that the late-war Bf-109 variants required such constant management that they were difficult to fly but easy to crash. The final production variant, the Bf-109K4, which appeared in October 1944, mounted the same DB605D engine but featured a completely redesigned fuselage with improved aerodynamics and a new, visually enhancing canopy that provided better rear visibility. Maximum speed increased marginally to 710 kilometers per hour at 6,600 meters, claiming the title of fastest piston engine fighter produced in quantity during the war. Yet such technical achievements were mere footnotes to a larger strategic reality. German air power was in terminal decline. By late 1943, Allied air superiority over Europe was nearly complete. The Spitfire Mark 14, powered by the Rolls-Royce Griffon engine, producing 2,050 horsepower, could outperform the Bf-109G in most performance parameters. The P-51D Mustang, with its American Merlin 61 engine and superior range, could fight Bf-109s at any altitude and disengage at will. The Hawker Tempest Mark V was faster at low altitude than any Bf-109 variant. German pilots, facing overwhelming numerical disadvantage and encountering increasingly experienced Allied fighter pilots, were being shot down faster than they could be trained and replaced. The Bf-109's final operational sorties occurred in May 1945, weeks before Germany's surrender. By then, the aircraft that had dominated European skies in 1940 to 1941 was relegated to home defense, often flown by child pilots, hastily trained, or by veteran pilots, too exhausted and wounded to continue combat effectively. Production records indicate that approximately 35,000 Bf-109 aircraft were manufactured in Germany, with additional hundreds produced under license in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Switzerland. Of these, the vast majority were destroyed in combat, captured, or scrapped by 1945. Yet the Bf-109's legacy extended beyond 1945. The Spanish Air Force operated Bf-109s, refitted with Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, into the 1950s. Czechoslovakia produced the aircraft as the Avia 199, with examples eventually reaching the nascent Israel Air Force in 1948, where they fought against Soviet-supplied fighters in the War of Independence. The design's fundamental excellence ensured that even as a legacy aircraft, it remained competitive against first-generation jet fighters. Few aircraft in history can claim such longevity and continued effectiveness.
When Nazi Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, thousands of Bf-109 aircraft were destroyed, captured, or abandoned. Yet within months, variants of this German fighter were flying combat sorties for Israel, Spain, and the Soviet Union. Within a decade, the aircraft had become a symbol not of German militarism, but of aeronautical excellence, an aircraft whose fundamental design was so sound that even as an aging legacy fighter, it remained competitive. This remarkable longevity offers historians a unique opportunity to assess the Bf-109 not as a propaganda icon or a museum piece, but as a technological and strategic achievement that shaped the course of aviation history. What the Bf-109 achieved. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 claims multiple firsts and mosts in aviation history.
It was the first aircraft to accumulate 20,000 confirmed aerial victories, more than any other aircraft type in history. This statistic, while requiring historical qualification, not all claims were verified, reflects an undeniable operational dominance during 1940 to 1942. The aircraft was produced in greater quantities than any other Axis warplane, with approximately 35,000 examples manufactured across multiple production facilities and under license. It was flown by the three highest-scoring pilots of all time: Erich Hartmann, 352 kills, Gerhard Barkhorn, 301 kills, and Walter Novotny, 258 kills, all of whom flew primarily the Bf-109 on the Eastern Front. Technological innovation. Willy Messerschmitt and Robert Lusser's design philosophy emphasize efficiency over raw power, climb rate over turn radius, energy management over sustained dogfighting, established principles that influenced fighter design for decades. The direct fuel injection system, revolutionary in 1940, became standard on high-performance aircraft. The inverted V-12 engine installation, which lowered the center of gravity and improved visibility, influenced post-war fighter designs. The Hanley-Page leading-edge slots, which provided automatic stall prevention, were adopted by countless aircraft. Most profoundly, the Bf-109 demonstrated that technological excellence could be achieved through evolution, not revolution, continuous refinement of proven principles rather than radical departures from established design doctrine. Tactical and doctrinal impact. The Spanish Civil War experience demonstrated that modern air warfare required new tactics. Werner Mulders's Finger Four formation, developed while flying Bf-109s over Spain, became the standard fighter formation for air forces worldwide. Pilots today still fly formations based on Mulder's principles. The emphasis on energy management, climbing to altitude, achieving speed, diving to attack, climbing away, became known as boom and zoom and remains a fundamental air combat concept. The Bf-109 taught a generation of pilots that superior altitude and energy state matter more than turning ability, lessons that influenced air combat doctrine during the Korean War, Vietnam War, and beyond. Strategic limitations. Yet the Bf-109 also illustrated fundamental strategic constraints. Despite superior performance in many parameters, the aircraft could not overcome numerical disadvantage, pilot attrition, industrial capacity limitations, and fuel shortages. The Battle of Britain, while demonstrating the Bf-109's technical excellence, proved that air superiority depends on more than aircraft performance. Command and control, pilot training pipelines, replacement rates, logistical support, and strategic positioning matter enormously. Germany lost air superiority not because the Bf-109 became inferior to Allied fighters, but because Germany could not sustain pilot losses and maintain aircraft production at the rate required by an industrial-scale air war. By 1943, even as Bf-109 variants reached their technical peak, the aircraft was increasingly relegated to home defense, a strategic failure masked by tactical victories. Post-war service and legacy. The Bf-109's presence in post-war air forces demonstrated its inherent quality. The Spanish Air Force operated Bf-109s refitted with Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, ironically the same engines used in the Spitfire, from 1945 through the mid-1950s. The Czechoslovak Air Force produced the aircraft as the Avia 199, with examples exported to Israel. The Israel Air Force, in its War of Independence, 1948, flew Bf-109s, captured German aircraft and those purchased from Czechoslovakia against Soviet-supplied fighters operated by Arab allies of the Soviet Union. Remarkably, Bf-109 pilots flying these aged aircraft achieved competitive kill ratios against Yak-9 fighters operated by Arab allies.
As late as 1950, the Bf-109 remained a viable combat aircraft, an extraordinary testament to the design's fundamental excellence. Historical significance and modern perspective. The Bf-109 occupies a paradoxical position in aviation history. It was developed and deployed by Nazi Germany, serving as an instrument of Nazi aggression and occupation. Yet its technical merits are undeniable, and its influence on fighter design principles extends across all air forces that fought the war, regardless of political alignment. Modern fighter doctrine, including the principles governing today's jet fighters, draws directly from lessons learned flying the Bf-109 in combat. Historians and engineers recognize the Bf-109 as a masterpiece of engineering efficiency, a fighter that achieved extraordinary performance from a relatively compact airframe and from engine technologies limited compared to post-war standards. The aircraft proved that clever design and continuous evolution could produce a world-class fighting machine without resorting to radical concepts or enormous size and weight. For contemporary military planners, the Bf-109 offers humbling lessons. Technical excellence alone does not guarantee strategic success. Germany possessed, during the period 1940 to 1942, an aircraft arguably superior to its British opponents in several performance metrics. Yet that technical advantage could not overcome strategic miscalculation, logistics limitations, industrial capacity constraints, and the enemy's superior organization and pilot replacement capacity. These are lessons that remain relevant to military strategists today. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 transformed from an underestimated interceptor in 1935 to a legendary fighter in 1940, dominated 3 theaters of war, produced more aerial victories than any other aircraft, influenced decades of fighter doctrine, and continued operational service long after its creators surrendered. Few machines in history, military or civilian, can claim such comprehensive impact.